Hi, Becca. I want you to know that I am uploading these to YouTube. So, just in case you want to not be seen or whatnot, I'm not doing it for public use, but I think they'll be able to be found. So, just because there's some people who haven't been able to come to a lot of them. When do you start school?
I start on the 25th and I found my school that I'll be at and I got third grade. So I'm
That's
really
awesome.
excited.
Third grade is third grade's a tough time. It's emotional for the poor little ones, but
Yes. I don't know in Texas, but in Oklahoma, it's like their big testing year
mhm,
and it's like a huge deal. Like they'll get held back if they don't. So
yeah.
I'm already praying a lot and trying to get ready so I can help.
Well, third grade's just hard anyway because 8 years old. I don't know if you remember being 8 years old, but with my kids, I mean, there were a lot of tears at night.
Tumultuous time.
Just a hard time. Hi, Katie. Hi, Kim. We'll give other people a chance to get on. We are going to be in Genesis 18 and 19. Oh, I'm getting some text. Sorry. Becca, what did you use this meeting and password from? From way back when I gave it to you?
I used it from the text just before your one today.
Oh,
So the 883 one.
yeah, it wasn't that long ago. Okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to copy and paste it?
No, I've got it. I'm just making sure that I've got a lot of people asking me because, we have had one since the new year began, but not everybody was kind of, I don't know. I think this is the week we all have to get our stuff together. I don't know about you, but um, I actually forgot two meetings yesterday. And,
Ooh.
I'm not going to say I never do that, but it has been a long time. So I haven't been carrying my calendar. Like I am not on the. I couldn't figure out what day it was all day long. So
I get it. I was with my friend last week and she got a call and she was like, "What meeting?" And I could hear on the other line they said, "The meeting you called." And she was like, "Oh, that's right. Okay, I have to leave now." And she
that's
had
right.
to leave.
I'll be right there. Yeah, I don't know. And then some of my students, my piano students, they're not. They're going to doing virtual school, so they don't know what day it is, and they can have their lessons early in the day, and so that messes me up. Even though I'm glad to do it early. But anytime you change something on me, it's like I lose my equilibrium a little, I guess. I don't know. And we've never been a normal family. I mean, Becca, you probably would experience this like 9 to 5, that's never been us. So anyway, I think Mike got a call at 12:30 last night. I just told him to turn the light off when he left the room. All right, we're in Genesis 19. And I told Becca, but I want to tell the rest of you, I am putting this up on YouTube, so you will be seen. It's not a public thing. They should be unlisted, which is somewhat private. And I don't think people will be clamoring to find them. So, I don't think you'll have a lot of exposure, but I just think you want to know, probably. Um, and we have a few people who are not on here at all times. And again, I also wanted to mention one of the reasons I'm recording it is because we have a lot of people who just like me, a steady weekly meeting sometimes is not always possible for them. So we're recording them so that they can kind of look them up later and listen to them later. Because remember, this is about the whole getting a working knowledge of the Old Testament. And I made a list after going through just Genesis of what I call the biggies, the things that we get some of our cultural language from, some of our definitely might be mentioned on the news, might be mentioned here and there. I remember back when I homeschooled my children, I had these books. In fact, I've got one behind me that they were like everything your child will need to know in order to be a functioning adult in their life later. And it was just so nothing kind of went through the cracks and nothing got missed. So they could listen to a presidential speech, or they could listen to a college class, and they would understand some of the, is it idioms, the verbal idioms or the colloquialisms, the little things in language that they may not just get from textbooks. So I say all that to say, so much of Genesis and the Old Testament is laced throughout our culture. You would just as well hear the phrase, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Something like that, as you would hear "the force be with you," right? And so you kind of have to have a general working knowledge of some of those things. Hang on, I don't want to miss Fiona. She is getting on, but she's having a little trouble. So here's my list, and you don't have to take notes on this, but I want to go over some of the things we've already talked about. For instance, creation. There are a lot of people who don't realize that the account of creation is in the Bible. They don't know where it comes from. They don't understand why people believe what they believe about it. And then the fall of man. We talk about the Garden of Eden. That fall of man is definitely a phrase within our culture. And it helps to know that at least biblically, refers to Eve eating of the fruit, Adam participating in the sin as well, and sin entering in their life because of their choice. Then you have Cain and Abel, and I've already referenced, am I my brother's keeper? That phrase comes from Cain killing Abel and his, I don't know, somewhat snarky comment maybe to God, I don't really know. It's like reading an email, you can't really assign emotion to it, but that seems like a strange comment to make. And then the flood, very interesting that the Bible teaches in Genesis 6 about the flood, and that every intention or every thought of every man was evil at all times. And it was such a dire situation, such a dire circumstance, that God was starting over with one righteous man and his family. And reading the account of the flood is pretty concise, not terribly long, and pretty eye-opening because, apparently we've had more than one movie about the flood, but I've never really been very up on movies, but I knew about the Russell Crowe movie about it within the last 5 years or so, maybe more. My life is speeding by. But, there were stowaways on that ark. There was infighting. There were, from what I understand, just a lot of misinformation. And, to be fair, the person that wrote the screenplay for The Flood, or whatever it was called, he claimed he wasn't going by the Bible. He was going by this myth in our culture of this one-time flood. But the real story of it is in your Bible. And you'd be surprised how many Christians have never actually read the story of the flood in the Bible, because they see the book of Genesis and they think it's very complex and long and difficult. And I really blame preachers for that. I think a lot of preachers make a lot out of the book of Genesis. Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry. Oh, thank you, Nancy. You answered that. Appreciate that. So because preachers will, and there's a lot, believe me, there's a lot in the book of Genesis. I think you could preach on it for a year and really progress through the story, but also sit on some of the topics. In our studies, we've talked about marriage and how marriage is seen in the Bible, which, we talk about Adam and Eve, and then how Abraham was married to Sarai, but then he had another woman that he slept with, had a child with. She was never considered his wife. Pharaoh took his wife, took Sarai, and wanted her to be part of his group of women, I guess. I'm assuming like what we call like a harem of women. When he found out she was Abraham's wife, he let her go, and he was in shock. No, why would it was obvious that he valued marriage. So there are lots of little side topics we can go off of. We're trying not to do that too much in this study, because it's not just a study of, it's a general study about Old Testament. Let's see. Then the covenant of the rainbow, how God put a bow in the sky, and it was that he was never going to destroy the world again in that way. Then we learn about the Tower of Babel. I think that's Genesis 11, where people are separated, they're scattered. Also, a cultural theme in American society anyway. Then we move on, and this would be more really along the lines of being able to listen to sermons and understand what they say, not feeling like you're walking into the middle of a conversation when you hear a sermon, which so often our visitors do feel that way. But Genesis 12, the promises to Abraham, that God begins, he chooses him. We know from Joshua chapter 24 that Abraham and his people were idol worshipers. I don't know if they knew who the Lord was at all, but the Lord does call Abraham. Abraham obeys him. It's funny because, and I'll probably mess this up, but my son was just talking to me last night about how cool it is, and my little mama heart, it does my little mama heart good when one of my kids brings a Bible subject to me and we talk about how cool it is, right? But he was talking about how cool it was that in Genesis, well, cool and not so cool on Abraham's part, but how in Genesis 12 that God gives Abraham a promise of land, a promise of protection. I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and a promise of making him, maybe it's making him a great nation. Let me see. Well, anyway, within no time at all, Abraham, who does leave his father's place, he leaves and he moves, an act of faith and obedience, but he very quickly forsakes these other promises of God, right? He tells, first of all, God has promised him this land, and he leaves the land because there was a famine in the land. So he goes to Egypt. He leaves the land that God gave him, Canaan. And then he is afraid that because his pretty old wife is apparently really beautiful, that the Pharaoh of the land is going to want her. So he lies about her. And he is afraid that they're going to kill him. But God has just promised him this protection, And so I just thought it was a really cool point. And he mentioned three things and three ways that Abraham sort of seemed to reject God's promises, even though he did accept them. So I'm sure that's a study for another time as well, but that was very interesting because Abraham's the father of faith, right? I mean, he is known for his great faith, and yet he definitely turned his back on God and some of God's promises pretty quickly. So moving on from there, so let's see, that's the promises to Abraham in Genesis 12, and then we get to Sarai and Hagar, another promise that Abraham seems to reject because Sarah says, God's not opened my womb, you've got to take this woman, she's likely fertile and I'm not. So if you're going to have any children, you're going to have them with her. And he does have a child with Hagar. It doesn't work out very well. And then we get to the circumcision covenant. And that's a very significant covenant because Um, it is now Abraham and his people also entering into a covenant. Nothing was really required of Abraham before this except that he leave the land, which he did. And now there's something required of him. And as we read last week, he immediately circumcised his entire household, including Ishmael, his son by Hagar. If you look at Genesis 17, in verse 26, Abraham himself is circumcised, and so is Ishmael, the very same day. And that brings us to this week, which is the study about Sodom and Gomorrah. And this, I know that you know, is a very pertinent subject to our culture, because we get even some of our language from this. The term sodomy comes from the city of Sodom and what they were known for. So I don't have a lot of commentary on this, and it's not needed because there's so much that's in the text. Yes, Nancy?
Are we skipping Genesis 18?
No, we'll talk a little bit about that, but we won't be going through it fact by fact.
Okay. I was just checking because I wrote down last week that we'd be doing Genesis 18, and now you're saying 19. And that's fine. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't losing my marbles.
Definitely.
Well, I am that too.
I'm not sure that's proof that you're not losing your marbles. No, but in Genesis 18, there's not a lot of what I'm calling like the biggies, you know, I call them buzzwords maybe. We've already talked about how there's a promise that Sarah's going to have a child because God has told him. Remember, Abraham said, well, what about, I think his name was Eleazar of Damascus. He's going to be my heir, right? Because he's in my household. And my right-hand man, so to speak. And God said, no, it's not going to be him. It's going to be somebody from your own body. And then later, we read last week that God said, you know, she's going to have your child. And he said, oh, don't you see Ishmael? Oh, that Ishmael would stand before you. And God said, it's not going to be, because this child, Ishmael, was from his body. But it wasn't going to be Ishmael. It was going to be a child through Sarah. So that was very specific. And so we get to Genesis 18. And there was a whole bunch about Genesis 18, verse 1, the oaks of, I think it's Mamre or Mamre, I don't know, M-A-M-R-E, that Abraham actually did a lot around this. And I'm going to see if I can find what I had seen about it real quickly. Because I think that was, hold on a minute. You can't see what I'm doing, but I can. Okay, this was a significant place in Abraham's life. Abraham moved to Mamre when he came back into the promised land from Egypt and built an altar there. So after the initial famine and he comes back to Canaan, he moved there and he built an altar there. That's in Genesis 13. And apparently he had stayed there sometime, Genesis 14 and verse 13 at that time. Abraham purchased a field and a cave at Mamre, using it for Sarah's burial, which is later found in Genesis chapter 23, 17 through 19. And Abraham himself was buried there in Genesis 25 and verse 9 that we read last week. And his son Isaac was also buried there, Genesis chapter 49, verse 30, and chapter 50 and verse 13. So he actually had quite a bit of history with this place, and he was known for being there. That's not really that significant in the grand scheme of things, but I do think it's quite interesting. Be nice if I knew how to pronounce that word. Anybody have any suggestions? Mamre, Mamre, I don't know. What happens is he is there, he is reclining there in the heat of the day, and he sees three men that appear to come out of nowhere, right? He lifted up his eyes, and behold, three men were standing opposite him. He immediately seems to know that there's something special about these men. I know that some people believe that this was God in the flesh visiting him. I do think there's some evidence for that. It's not clearly spelled out for us here. Um, but he definitely stops what he is doing and asks them to come and eat with him. He runs into the tent and he tells his wife to prepare the flour in order to make the bread. So enough for 3 loaves of bread. So he wants to be hospitable to these people. He can tell there's something special. You can tell that from the text. I'm going to read, let me see, 18, and I'm going to read through 1 through verse 8. Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. That's typical greeting, but also a sign of worship. And said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. And after that, you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. Verse 6, so Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarai and said, Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. No little amount of time passed. First of all, does he know how long it takes to knead bread and make bread? I don't know. But she had plenty of time because they also slaughtered a cow and prepared it for them. So they were there, they were resting. I do think it's interesting that my New American Standard says your servant in verse 3, do not pass your servant by. And I don't know about your translation, but mine has a capital Y there. Clearly my New American Standard is stating that that is the Lord, and that is that this is an encounter with God. We can only go by what's in the text, and I don't mean the capitalizations. I mean what's information is in the text. And I think what we can say is that Abraham knew that this was a special encounter. They were definitely sent from God, whoever they were, because they prophesy both to Abraham and Sarah, and they also prophesy to Lot. So we can definitely say that. But they stay there. He takes care of them. One thing, I think is interesting is if this is God in the flesh, as he is believing that it is, why he would feel like he would be a necessary part of like sustaining them physically, because what do we really have that could sustain God? I mean, the food, and the drink. Either way, he took a full meal and put it in front of them, and they ate. And then they prophesy from verses 9 to 15. They prophesy about Sarah. They say, next year at this time, she will have a child in her arms. Very interesting information. I think, like Sarah, I would have laughed as well, because that's crazy. Although if someone were to tell me that next time this year I'd have a child of my own in my arms, I would not be laughing. I would be, I think I'd be crying. I think I'd be panicked. But, and then down in verse 16, and the only reason I'm skipping through that is because this has already been information we already have. So in general terms, we skip ahead, go to verses 16 through 21, and we have God musing to himself. Should I talk to Abraham about what I'm about to do? Turns out he does talk to Abraham about what he is going to do. What is he going to do? He's going to deal with Sodom and Gomorrah. If you look at verse 20, it says, and the Lord said, The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. So it's a matter of assessment. I'm going to go and I'm going to assess. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. It does say that two men entered the city of Sodom. If you go on to chapter 19 and verse 1, now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and we were told that they went ahead, the two went ahead, and that Abraham stayed and had a conversation with the Lord. So do with that what you will. Verse 22, he was still standing before the Lord. And then they have this conversation, and it's a bit obscure, which is why I don't spend a lot of time on this, but it's a great read, and it's just a matter of Abraham pleading for the cities. You know, nobody wants to see whole cities destroyed, unless you're Jonah, and then you want to see Nineveh destroyed, because for some reason he really hated Nineveh. But you know, Abraham is saying, if you destroy the whole city in verse 23, surely you're going to destroy some of the righteous along with the wicked. You know, that's a problem. And then he says, suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? And he seems to know the nature of the city, because his bargaining goes down and down and down and down. Well, suppose, let's see, where does he go next? 50, the Lord said, verse 26, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous, I will spare the whole place on their account. So that's good, but then Abraham goes further.
And then 40. He goes to 45.
He goes to 45 in verse 28. 50 minus 5, you know, let's go down. What if that? So he really truly seems to know what Sodom is like, whether he's been there or he has also heard about the city. We don't know how he knows about it, but he definitely does. He goes down to 20 in verse 31. And then finally in verse 32, he goes down to 10. The Lord said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. I wonder if Abraham felt like that was good, since some of his family was there, right? So that's kind of our build-up to Genesis 19, and we're going to read a bit through Genesis 19. Kim, how you feel about reading tonight? Hold on. You got me, Kim Drawbaugh?
Okay, now I'm there.
Okay,
Okay, sorry, I had to get to the unmute button and it was hidden.
that's all right.
Okay,
Let's see. Let's start reading. We're going to actually read this whole, well, the first 29 verses. I will tell you that at the end of the chapter, there is an interaction with Lot and his two daughters. As always, very interesting read, very difficult read, not part of what I would consider Old Testament overview. It's a bit obscure as far as like pulling us, keeping us on, you know, the big topics and the, you know, just the subjects that kind of keep us through the Old Testament. But so we're not going to deal with that tonight, but we're going to go through verse 29. Let's see.
okay, so start with verse 1.
Yeah, but only go through verse 11, if you will.
Okay, so chapter 19, verses 1 through 11. Okay. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Hear now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, No, but we will spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, now I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. And they said, Stand back. Then they said, This one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great. So they became weary trying to find the door.
Thank you. So much in these first 11 verses, don't you think? Now, we don't get the sense that Lot in the beginning is treating these men the same way that Abraham did. And that might be because that third person is not with them. But he does treat them well. He does, I guess the word is, entreat them to come with him, and he does open his home and take care of them, cooks for them. And then they were not wanting to put him out, and so they were going to sleep in the city square. But Lot knows that that is not safe. It's very clear that he knows that that is not safe. See verse 4, before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. So there's a great mass. Everyone in the city basically who's a male is surrounding their house. And they're interested in having homosexual sex with these men. And that's a very serious thing. Lot knows that's not the right thing. I want you to notice that we've not dealt with this subject at all in your Old Testament so far. We have not dealt with it. Kim's version said we want to know them carnally. That would be in a flesh way. My version says bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. It's not really spelled out, but it is clear what they're wanting to do to these men. Partially it's clear because Lot defines it further. Later in verse 8 he says, well, first of all, he condemns it in 7 and says, do not act wickedly. And then verse 8, so he defines it by it's a wicked act. Verse 8 is, behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with man. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof. Very distressing verse for so many reasons. It seems as though he is protecting strangers over his own daughters. But this also, if you just take this at its face right here, you further get a definition of what the men wanted to do to the men in the house, right? So I don't think there's any misunderstanding exactly what is going to go on if Lot brings these men out and allows the men of Sodom to do what they want. We know that it's not an acceptable thing to the men. They don't want women. They want men. Then they want those men. They want new men. Apparently, the word got around that there were 2 new men in the town. And so they went to Lot to get the new men surrounding the door, and with a real mob mentality, almost wanting to attack Lot and break down the door to get to these new men. It almost sounds like a drug-induced mob, if you will, like a frenzy. And the men in verse 10 who are in the house reached and got Lot and brought him into the house and kept him safe. And then in verse 11, they were able to strike the closest ones to the house. They struck them blind so that they couldn't break into the house. What are your thoughts about the first 11 verses here? Any thinking thoughts here?
it's always disturbed me how he offered his daughters in the place of the men.
Mhm.
I just I don't understand. That makes no logic sense at all.
Mhm.
You know, so I don't understand how that was something that was good. And
Yeah.
I can't make any sense out of it
Well,
or any reason out of it.
it definitely helps to understand that not everything that is wrong in the Old Testament is obviously and instantly condemned, but this would have been wrong. It would have been horrific. I mean, this, what it shows you is the value of women and the value of men. At that time, women were not valued. Look at what they did to Sarah. Abraham's like, just go, tell them you're my sister. What do you think was going to happen to Sarah with Pharaoh, the king of the land? What did he think? And why was he not a protector of her? Actually, when God said he was going to protect Abraham, you know? But he wasn't, and he offered her, and he does it actually again in chapter 20, which I don't know why he didn't learn his lesson the first time, but it seems as though the value of women was so low that it seemed an acceptable thing to Lot. It could be that Lot did it, you know, in a panic, not knowing what to do. You know, I don't know. I know that we read in our New Testament that Lot was considered righteous, you know, and this does not seem like the actions of a righteous man. Um, but you know, I think it's just really important, especially when you're talking to children about the Bible, to explain that just because it's there doesn't mean it was a-okay and God was all right with it and it was all right. There wasn't immediate punishment, but for sin there was punishment. There's always punishment for sin, just not immediately there. Anybody else have anything about that? Because I am with you. That's a disturbing, verse 8 is disturbing. Hey, Becca.
I didn't. I just think it's interesting how like we talk about like how like at that time women weren't valued, and then like even then like in chapter 12 in Genesis verse 17 it says the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah.
Mhm.
And I just think it's like sometimes like people will take this and show like, oh, God doesn't care about women, but there are like other times where like he did like act on things or punish people because of the way they were treating women. It's
Mhm.
kind of interesting.
It is interesting. And it's very interesting to go to the New Testament and see how Jesus treated women. He really treated them with love and honor. Um, you know, it might have just been the whole patriarchal system, the fact that men were the heads of the house, that the fathers were the heads of the community, which was almost like, you know, the mayor of the land, if you will. The covenant relationship that we have read about last week was a covenant of circumcision. Women are not circumcised. We do not have a foreskin, you know, so it wasn't like this was anything that was with the women. So, you know, it might have just been a cultural thing at the time. Regardless of how the culture treats women or how the people around you see you as a woman, even today, we still have responsibility to God in our obedience and our submission. Go ahead, Nancy. Are you muted? No.
I just unmuted. The area of Iraq and Iran still do not value, well, Muslims, period, do not value women.
Mm-hmm.
They, for no reason at all, throw bricks on their heads or smash their heads with big blocks of concrete or, you know, all kinds of things because they walked out without a male house member with them as a chaperone, just for practically nothing. So I'm sure the culture was similar at that time, not that they were killing their women for nothing, but they were not valued
Mm-hmm.
in that area,
And it was
in
a very
that area of the world.
a very violent and aggressive time as well. We don't know anything. I have not found anything at all about Sodom and Gomorrah and their system of law, because usually when you have a city, you have some sort of system of law, and what was illegal and what was not illegal. I really haven't found anything about that. I don't, it's something when God destroys a city like he does, that there's nothing left. We don't have any stones. We don't have any information about Sodom and Gomorrah. And believe me, we have a lot of information about the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia and those ancient cities, but not Sodom and Gomorrah. They were ultimately and utterly destroyed. Okay, Kim, can you read for me again verses, let's see, 12 through, I'd like you to do 12 through 22.
Okay. Then the man said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be joking. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, and the Lord nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Then Lot said to them, please, no, my lords. Indeed, now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, the city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said to him, see, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Is that where you wanted me to stop, or go on to 29?
You can go through 29.
Okay. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw and behold the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the city in which Lot had dwelt.
Okay, so when we go back to verse 12, you see that they make a distinction between who's talking by saying, then the 2 men said to Lot. Remember, there's a mass of men, there's a great number of men. That's not who he's talking about. The 2 men said to Lot, who are we rescuing here? Who have you got? And they make it very clear that they're about to destroy the city, and it's because of their sin. They didn't say because of what they did tonight, can't believe what happened tonight. I don't know how surprised they were by what happened. They knew about Sodom. And verse 14, Lot attempts to persuade the 2 young men who are around, who are interested in marrying his daughters, but they just thought he was kidding, and they don't end up being rescued. They end up being destroyed with the city. There's something I wanted to bring up about the city and what it was known for. You know, this homosexuality was part of what this city was known for. It was the outcry that God was talking about, or that the Lord was talking about in chapter 18. And it's a very serious thing. I think sometimes in our culture, we see the sin of homosexuality as the most serious thing, you know, that we fear and we fight against this most serious sin. And it is a very serious sin, obviously, because we've just read all the way through verse 29 and the terrible destruction of this city. But it's important that we realize it is not the only serious sin. It's not the only thing to fight against. But I also want you to notice the contagion that homosexuality is. And I know that people would laugh at that and think that's ridiculous, you know, but it actually is, because it's an ideology that's contagious. This is okay, and we're accepting of this, and it's just, you know, I don't want to offend, and so I won't talk against. And so we end up seeming to be more accepting of these things than what God is. And we need to be careful of that. So see if you can balance my last two statements. Very serious sin, but not the only or the most serious sin. So it is not the only thing we fight against and teach against. But on the other hand, if you are not taking it seriously enough, it's very easy for it to become a contagion. A person doesn't fit anywhere in the culture, and then they determine that they fit there in the culture, and they're accepted there. It's definitely something that also we should not end up ignoring, which is kind of what we end up doing. God was very concerned about these people, but they would not obey him. So moving on, let's see, verse 15, that was nighttime, now it's morning time. The angels are urging Lot to hurry. And I don't really blame Lot. I don't know how I would feel if I was also told to leave everything behind. Thankfully, I would be able to take my wife and 2 daughters if I was Lot, but everything else is left behind. It would be difficult to do. I really believe that. I would like to say it wouldn't, but I know that it would. And he is hesitant in verse 16. So the men actually physically take him, seize his hands, take his daughter's hands, take his wife's hands, and pull them out of the city. And they said in verse 17, escape for your life. You're going to die if you stay. You're escaping for your life. Here's the command: do not look behind you and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Don't stop. So not only don't look behind you, but run for your life and don't stop. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. This is going to be a disastrous weather event. Let's just say that. And you are to get as far away as possible. And Lot is upset by that in verse 18. And he is saying, I know in verse 19 that you're showing me kindness by saving my life. You know, never a good way to start a sentence. I know that you're doing this and helping me, but I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me and I will die. I'm not sure if the disaster he's talking about is the grief, the solitude, being away from others. I don't know what the disaster will overtake me and I will die exactly means. Does anybody have anything else there in verse 19 at the end? Because I could not figure out in my studying exactly what he thinks is going to kill him. Anybody? Maybe you don't have it either. But what we do know is he says, but there's this little town over here, actually called Small Town. Zoar, my footnote says, means small. So there's a small town here, and I can go there. Just let me go there. that my life may be saved, in verse 20. And so he is granted that request, and they say, go right away, because this is going to happen, and it's not going to happen until you are safely away. In 23, he goes to Zoar, the small town, and then we have this catastrophic event, I guess we could call it. The Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. So they are being completely destroyed. What will happen is it's like a huge, huge fire, and they will be burned to the ground. Let's see. And then 26, but his wife, meaning Lot's wife, from behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Also very interesting. She could have turned to dust. She could have burst into flames, but she turned into a pillar of salt. I don't know if that was a Lot's wife shape pillar of salt, or just a pile of salt, or a thing of rock salt. We don't really know. A pillar tends to be a pole, or it tends to be like rock. So I would go with that. But what we know is she disobeyed. And I can only imagine how difficult that would have been not to disobey when something is happening like has never happened before. We're not told this has ever happened before. The world's been destroyed by flood. We know that civilizations were pretty decimated by confusion in Genesis 11, right? The Tower of Babel. But we are not told that anyone else has had fire and brimstone rain down on them. And I think I'd want to see it. So I would be a pillar of salt. But not only were the cities, all the valleys surrounding the cities, all the inhabitants of the cities, and everything that grew on the ground. So completely gone. And I think that's why we have no information about them. Not trying to be silly at all there, but I think that's why, because they have so much information about the ancient Near East. And then verses 27 through 29. As you know, Abraham's not in the city of Sodom. He's not there because he, way back when his herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen were having clashes and trouble, they separated. And he told Lot to choose where he wanted to go. And Lot chose Sodom. We don't know if Lot had ever been to Sodom and knew anything about Sodom, but we knew that he was a farmer, that his life was an agricultural life, and it was beautiful over there and lush and gorgeous. So probably pretty smart for him to choose that land. However, it was debased and corrupt and immoral, the people were. In verse 27 of chapter 19, now Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. So that's all he can see. And imagine it's like when something is burning close by and you don't know what it is. Sometimes it's a house fire and you just see the billowing smoke and you're like, what in the world is that? And that's what Abraham saw, just the billowing smoke. Must have been quite a sight. And then verse 29, thus it came about when God destroyed the cities of the valley that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. So he has the protection of God. Abraham does, and Abraham's family does. And like I said, moving on, verses 30 through 38 is about the sin of Lot's daughters, that they both actually have sex with their father. and bear children by their father. I mean, it's a really terrible story. Also not condemned, but also very wrong. If you look at verse 36, it says, thus both daughters of Lot were with child by their father. I will tell you that out of that, we do get the Moabites, and then the Ammonites come out of Lot and his offspring with his daughters. And that's it. I mean, I think that's plenty. Definitely a needed story when it comes to our culture. The word sodomy is a made-up word that comes from the city of Sodom and what the city of Sodom was known for. You don't have to know that in order to hear the word sodomy, but it definitely helps define what that is. I think it's very interesting that it's not a graphic story as far as, a very exact description of what these men wanted to do with the guests who were at Lot's house, and yet you understand it. You can clearly from the context understand. I also think that it's very sad that, I mean, I think we're 7 generations from the flood, so we are a ways away from, how bad the world was, and then it all started over with Noah and his family. But here we are. I can't imagine that what was happening at the time of the flood was much different than what we're seeing in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and also with Lot's daughters. What they seemed to think was a perfectly logical way to have an offspring was to get their father drunk and sleep with him. It just seems like a very immoral and sinful society. But important as far as understanding the Old Testament and understanding God as well. Anybody have any closing comments?
What verse was it that you were asking if we have something else on? I'm sorry, I was driving at that time.
I don't know, but if you bring up what you had, maybe we'll remember the verse.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Well, we were talking about verse 8 of chapter 19, which was, we want these men, bring these men out here. And Lot says, take my daughters instead. That was definitely something that people have comments on. I don't know. There's really a lot in this. Did you have anything, Tori?
No, I just was gonna look and see if my version had any, if it had anything else, but I can't remember what it was now. So I guess it's okay.
Oh, I know. The one about the version was verse 19 when I said, Lot had said, oh, thank you. Becca put it up there. Where he had said, this disaster will overtake me and I'm going to die, so send me to this small town. I didn't understand, and I still don't have an understanding of what that disaster was that was going to overtake him.
Okay.
You got anything different?
You show great kindness, but can't flee this disaster. Nope.
Okay. I do think it's really interesting that the heading of my verse 30 says that Lot is debased. Because he was, I mean, in our culture, we would say he was sexually assaulted. It was not a consensual act. He was deliberately made drunk. And they had a sexual relationship with him while he was drunk. But I feel like Lot was debased back in chapter 19. After reading verse 8 and he's offering his daughters, I just thought, wow, that's, it seems like nobody's got a moral compass here. But that is the way that things work. 1 Corinthians 15:13 says that if you're around bad company, it's going to affect you. It's going to affect your morality. So not to get too preachy because we're in Old Testament here, but it's contagious, very, very serious. Anybody else? All right. Thank you, everybody. I think we'll do it 6:30 again, unless you tell me that it's not working for you. If you miss some, I'll send a link to the YouTube channel that have these recorded. Again, they will be unlisted. So I think unless you have the link, you can't get there. And if, I haven't gone through every one of them and rewatched them. I know the information is good, but I don't know, if we're having conversations at the beginning or the end, I might want to take those off if I could figure out how to do that. Anyway, it's private, so hopefully it'll just be us. All right, everybody. I love you all.
Bye. Thank you.